by welcoming in the brilliant columnist and historian Victor Davis Hanson, who's been following and studying the fine print on the Mueller investigation and now the Inspector General report on the Hillary Clinton email scandals, details of which leaked out this week. Mr. Hanson, welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio. The IG report is leaking out, the Inspector General report, and the full report will be out one of these days. We've been saying that for a long time now, but I think a lot of people don't understand about how the Inspector General works. His name is Michael Horowitz. He's the equivalent to, let's say, a police department's internal affairs division or the ombudsman at a newspaper. They operate independently and do investigations of Justice Department internal operations. Now, couldn't we just have assigned the IG to investigate what Mueller was hired to spend millions of dollars and who knows how much time investigating?
I think we could have, and we've done that before. I mean, when John Brennan said that he did not lie to the Senate staffers in 2014 when he was accused of using the CIA to monitor Dianne Feinstein's staff, the CIA Inspector General came out and said, no, Mr. Director, you did do that. And then he confessed that he did, and he apologized, and the Washington Post even called for his resignation. When people alleged that Devin Nunes had been leaking, and he was referred to the Ethics Committee, then the Inspector General of the House went and looked at him and said, no, he did not leak. That was a politicized complaint, and so then he was exonerated. And so we have IGs. In fact, they've been very prominent lately, and they're in all of these different branches of government, and they've got a pretty good reputation. But in this case, people there was a hysteria. We've got to remember what the hysteria was. Donald Trump was not supposed to win. The New York Times said he had a 3% chance on election. He won. That shocked people, and they were angry, and they tried to find a reason, and Hillary Clinton stepped up and did not tell people about the Steele dossier and how that was birthed. And so the proper narrative that she sat on a lead and did not campaign in the purple swing states where the election would be decided in the Midwest, instead she wasted her effort trying to get a huge margin in places like Arizona and Georgia, which she couldn't win. That was too untenable, so they came up with this, the Russians stole the elections and gave it to Trump. And in that media hysteria, in a moment of, I guess, uncertainty, Jeff Sessions recused himself. And then Rod Rosenstein, nobody even knew who he was, but he was actually an Obama holdover, knee-deep in the email scandal, the Uranium One scandal, the FISA court request. So he was compromised, but yet he picked his friend Robert Mueller. And then that's where the genesis of this whole problem started. And once Robert Mueller was there, the Republicans really couldn't remove him, either could Trump, because of the downfall before the midterm election.
What they did, in essence, was hire a former FBI director who presumably is very loyal to the agency and cares about its image, to investigate the FBI, which is why a lot of people don't understand why there wasn't someone totally independent from these institutions. But you mentioned the Steele dossier. Let's talk about that for a second. It's been called discredited. It's been called scurrilous. We know that it was funded by the Clinton campaign and or the Democratic National Committee, and that a lot of the accusations in there, or a lot of the information has been very deeply questioned. But do you think, from what you've seen and what you know, and you've studied this stuff, is there anything in the Steele dossier that's true?
There are things that, let me say, they're unverified. So the idea that Carter Page was a link to the Russians is false. There's no evidence he did anything wrong. He wasn't going to get a huge percentage of, I don't know what it was, $1 billion percentage of a Russian oil company. That was absurd. There's no verification of Trump's sexual ante in a hotel room. There's no. And so it's as if I wrote something about you or you wrote something about me, and I said it was untrue, you said it was untrue, but you would have to go out and, I mean, if I say that Donald Trump did X, how am I and it didn't happen, how am I going to prove that it didn't happen? And they did not tell the FISA court judge A, this is unverified. B, the news accounts that we're using as substantiation are based on the dossier in circular fashion. 3, we got rid of Steele. He doesn't work for us. He's unreliable. And 4, Hillary Clinton paid for this. All that information was never given to a justice. And the reason it wasn't given is they know that no judge would have approved those warrants. Rod Rosenstein may or may not be a good man. We don't know. But he has relationships with the Uranium One investigation, the email investigation, the FISA court investigation, personal relationships with Mueller, personal relationships with Comey, and he's knee-deep in it. And so he needs to resign, and then the Inspector General and DOJ and other people can examine his behavior. I don't know whether it was good or bad. Nobody does. But you cannot have a person at the center controlling the investigation who is himself a witness to many of the things that went on.
Exactly. Well, we still don't know what triggered the FBI investigation of Trump, nor when it actually began. They claim late July 2016, but the activity in London surrounding the FBI informant Stephen Halper suggests it was far earlier. When, if ever, and how do you suspect we'll get answers to these central questions?
Well, we're starting to. The FBI said we didn't want to have an investigation. It was only when an Australian diplomat told us that in a bar somebody, Mr. Papadopoulos, leaked or drunk or rumored something about hacking with Russian connections. So then we got involved. But we know now that's not true, that prior to that they had already been inquiring or using an informant to set up a surveillance of the Trump campaign. So that's not true. And even if it were true, we know that Mr. Downer himself had been a large, an agent that was responsible for the Australian government giving a lot of money to the Clinton Foundation. So the problem with all of these things that we've been discussing is that they're so multifaceted. So there's the uranium one, there's the email, there's the masking, the leaking, there's the FISA court, there's the informant.
Right. So it's so confusing.
Existential that if it were to all be true, what would it mean? It would be the biggest scandal in the history of the United States, and at the center of it would be ultimately Barack Obama, and that's the problem. That's Rod Rosenstein. That's Mueller. That's all of the media, Washington Post, New York Times. That is the question. They do not want to go any further because they suspect they might not like where it leads.
On that note, Mr. Hansen, many thanks for spending some time with us today.
Thank you.
Victor Davis Hansen.